Have you ever signed a contract and immediately wondered if you left money on the table? Well, that feeling doesn't go away. It sits there for 13 weeks, reminding you that you took the first decent number you saw because you were tired of looking. Tallywise lets you upload that offer and watch other employers try to beat it. Tallywise, get a better offer, guaranteed.
You're listening to Nurse Converse, presented by Nurse.org, a collaborative podcast amplifying diverse nurse voices. Get ready for a dose of inspiration, a sprinkle of education, and a whole lot of community.
Hey guys, thanks for joining me again, Jana Price, on another episode of Nurse Converse. Today, I have the pleasure of having Amanda and Dave Repsher on. I met both of these guys at a BCM conference in Destin, Florida, and I came to this conference as an attendee. I came up to speak. I didn't know what we were getting into. And by the end of hearing Dave and Amanda speak, I felt like I had watched an episode or an entire Rudy movie all over. This is hands down one of the most encouraging, and it's just such a privilege to have them on today based on what you guys are going to hear. So but guys, thanks for coming on and thanks for taking time to speak with us. I want to introduce them. Dave was in an accident many years ago. He was in a helicopter crash that burned over 90% of his body. And Amanda became his wife through it all. And she stood by his side through the whole time. Now, that's an amazing story in itself. But let me tell you what really makes this amazing is Dave and Amanda are both nurses. And they're one of us guys. So here we are. We've got this amazing story that I hope today, go ahead, sit down, get a cup of coffee. If you're driving, go ahead and prepare yourself because the story you're about to hear is going to be life-changing. And it's such an honor to have you guys on. So thanks for joining us, Amanda and Dave.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Absolutely. All right, so let's go ahead and start this out. I want to give you guys, like we said, we're talking to two nurses here. These are our people. And I want to hear a little bit about, before we get into just the intensity of what happened, which I want to warn you guys, it is very intense. So go ahead and prepare yourself, but don't shy away. Don't turn away. This story is something that we all have faced in our nursing career as far as taking care of patients. And you're going to come away with some great insight and some information. But let's talk about, Dave and Amanda, how did you guys start out as nurses? Let's start with you, Dave. Where did you start out?
So I was a ski bum, for lack of better terms. I got out of college and my first go around to college and really didn't know what I was going to do, and ended up taking a year off, going to Utah and being a full ski bum there. And in between the summer, I ended up taking a job at a ski patrol at Copper Mountain, Colorado. And that was sort of my introduction to emergency medicine. And I fell in love with it and kind of worked my way up and became a paramedic and worked on the ambulance for quite a few years. And then eventually I decided I wanted to continue my education and sort of, expand out, and hopefully end up on a helicopter at some point. And so I went back to nursing school and worked in intensive care unit in Denver, Colorado for 4 years until I was had enough experience to get on to helicopter with Flight for Life. And that was huge for me. That was sort of the culmination of my life experience. And it's really where I wanted to be. And I was, I was thrilled to go to work. I really enjoyed that responsibility and, sort of that, serving of the community or, however you want to frame it in the region. And so I really loved it. I thrived on it. And it was just a great challenge. And, I still miss it to this day. But
Absolutely. And that's amazing. Amanda, what's your background?
Well, it's kind of funny. I actually tell people that I literally fell into nursing because I was a raft guide and a snowboard instructor. And then I had an injury from a fall that I couldn't do those physical jobs anymore. And I had taken my EMT basic to help me with those jobs. And so then I took a job in the ER working as a front desk admissions person, and just one thing led to another. And I ended up working on the ambulance, and then I went to paramedic school, and I worked on the ambulance in the Vail Valley for 7 years. While I was doing that, I decided that I really wanted some longer contact with my patients. And so I went to nursing school, and then just kind of did all sorts of different nursing. Really fell into the ICU aspect. I really loved that. And I did oncology ICU, which is still one of my most rewarding jobs that I've done. And then cardiac ICU. I did transition into administrative nursing. So I was a trauma outreach manager for the largest health system in Colorado at the time of Dave's crash. We actually did work for the same company. He was with the flight aspect, and I was in the administrative trauma department.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Did you two meet at an ACLS class?
Very romantically, yes. So
spoken like two true nurses right there.
Yeah, it's everyone dreads going to ACLS, but hey, sometimes good things come of it.
Yeah,
so
there you go. Hey, guys, listen out there who might be single, you may end up getting your partner out of it. So okay, spokesperson for there. That's amazing. Well, that's awesome, guys. You both have a very extensive background.
Yeah.
And to Dave's credit, asking me out, our first official date was kayaking together. So
wow.
And he was amazing. About 45 minutes to an hour late, and I was with my roommate, and I said, "Nope, we're waiting. We're definitely waiting." And he showed up with his brother, and
oh, wow! Look at what a good woman waiting for you. That is amazing, awesome. Yeah. All right, well that's an amazing background, and that leads us into. I want to go ahead and fill you guys in on a little background, and then I'm going to let them tell the story, but. On July 3rd, 2015, Dave was flying. I believe you were going to a PR event. He was a flight nurse on a helicopter. And they were at a hospital when they were leaving. And shortly after takeoff, I believe it was 32 seconds. If I'm correct, it was 32 seconds after takeoff, the helicopter crashed right in front of the hospital. And there was a pilot. It was Dave and nurse, and there was another nurse. And Dave, when it crashed, was covered in fuel, and he was on fire, and he had 90% of his body burned. And for you burn nurses out there and ICU nurses, a 90% TBSA is we all know the statistics of surviving that are almost none, and very few people do, and the ones that do rarely go on to live a life like Dave is living. So it's an amazing, amazing thing that you survived, but it does not come without a story and a lot of tragedy. The pilot of the plane did not survive. And it's an emotional thing to see. There's a documentary out called D-Rep, and there's also something that a Denver news station did, Channel 9 News, where it actually shows the plane crashing, and you can see Dave pushing the door open, covered in flames because he was covered in the jet fuel, getting out and people rushing to save him. And in the same sense, you can see I believe it was an X-ray tech, went and used a fire extinguisher to help get the pilot out. And he did not survive, but he survived long enough to say goodbye to his widow, Karen. And it is the documentary. I highly encourage you to watch it. It's incredible. It tells the struggle, but here we have Dave and Amanda today who are going to kind of walk us through the day of the crash and what came after it, because I've had a chance to listen to them. And as nurses, this is what I want everyone to get out of this. They went into this as two people who had experienced a tragedy with a nursing background, right? We have a tragedy with a nursing background. And they went in as nurses, but also as patients. They're going to come away with a lot of lessons that I hope you out there as nurses will take away for when you're taking care of your patients. And for those of you who inevitably will experience tragedy, I want you to take the lessons that Dave and Amanda have to teach, because this is truly a story that is life-changing for all these nurses out here. So I'm going to go ahead and step back, guys, and let's start out, if you don't mind, Dave, if you'll just kind of walk us through that day, and then Amanda, chime in whenever you guys want.
Yeah, it's it's hard to believe it's been a little over 10 years now, but we're looking back on that day, it was just going to a day of work, right? We had just gotten back from vacation, and it was a really busy holiday weekend. We live in a resort community. We're surrounded by 5 major ski resorts, and it's a big summer community from the just the region, and so it was packed. It was the hospital was busy, but we were just that day we had a public relations event scheduled, which is very common on a helicopter. It's we call them touch a truck days or whatever you want to call it, but like you fly in, and we're going to a Boy Scout camp just 60 miles away. There's fire trucks and police cars and whatever else, and you're part of the whole thing. And thankfully we didn't have a patient on board, or we were going to help someone out, and something went catastrophically wrong on takeoff, and just at that point it was my memory's a bit spotty still, but I just remember kind of being along for the ride. There's really not much you can do, and just grabbing onto my harness and holding on, and I remember the impact, and I was confused, but I don't think I lost consciousness, but can't really tell for sure. I don't have that memory, but really my first big recollection after the impact was just the sensation of cold liquid pouring over my back and shoulders, and I reference it as people see the coach getting the bucket of Gatorade dumped on him at the end of the Super Bowl, whatever it is, or the ice bucket challenge from those days in the back, and that's just that's what I remember. And then it was flame,
and that the cold liquid was jet fuel,
sitting in the back left seat and right up against the bulkhead, and the fuel tank sits right behind me. And so on impact, the bulkhead collapsed, and the fuel tank collapsed and poured right away. And so, and then with all those vapors and hot engines and hot parts, it ignited, and so I was engulfed in flames. And I didn't, I knew I just had to get out. I had to get away. Like I really didn't know where my location was. I didn't have real sense of what was going on. I just had to get out. And turns out I pushed the door off and just tried to get away from the helicopter, try to get away from the flames. And every direction I turned, there was flame, because it turns out that I was the flame. So I was just fully saturated, fully engulfed. And like I said, it was a busy holiday weekend, and there's a bike path that runs right behind the hospital. And this gentleman was just on his day off, riding his bike, and witnessed this whole terrible thing. Saw me running around on fire, and yells out like, "Get on the ground and roll towards me." And that's all I could focus on at that point, and hearing that voice. And so I just ended up kind of rolling down to him, and this poor guy's scooping dirt on me for like 2 minutes until a fire extinguisher finally made it from the hospital out to me. And the same fire extinguisher that you referenced in the introduction was Jimmy, a CT tech who was had the wherewithal amazingly to grab that, come out to the helicopter, and got Patrick out. And that was the same fire extinguisher that finally got to me and put me out. And at that point,
thank you, Jimmy, if you listen.
Yeah, thank you. Amazing story. He got burned in the process as well. That doesn't get really recognized much, but he suffered burns on his face and forehead from just the intense heat that he was in trying to get Patrick out. So, wow. Just an amazing story in itself. And then obviously the world to Karen, because without that Patrick was able to get out of that helicopter. Otherwise, it's you can imagine just imagine that. There are so many stories within the story. It's it just of people stepping up.
Right.
It's just amazing.
And Patrick actually was able to speak to the other nurse on board. They were laying next to each other on the ground before they got into the ER. And
Wow.
he told him he loved him.
So,
Wow. That's really, and that was Matt, that was also the other nurse as well. And
Yeah.
so
wow.
Matt was, he was sitting next to me on the right side, right behind Patrick, and he was saturated in fuel as well. But, thankfully he was able to kind of scramble out of the helicopter before he was, so he never got ignited. And so, although he's saturated, he was able to kind of scramble out and get away. And, so he did, he had some hidden injuries and, that he continues to deal with these days, but he's doing well, thankfully, doing really well.
Good.
So,
Good. I'm glad to hear that. So you were in this, you're out there, they've extinguished the fire. You guys are at a hospital, right? I believe you were at a level 3, am I correct? Hospital. And obviously they bring you in and they get you into the ER. They've got all 3 of you coming into the ER, and as well, Jimmy, we've got injured people. Is it 4, maybe more people who helped? I'm not quite sure, that are injured that come into this hospital. And without a doubt, you and Patrick are by far the worst burned. And you come in, and what happened at that time once you were in this ER? What's going through your mind that you can remember?
Well, I guess once a nurse, always a nurse, right? So the ambulance crew, again, they're all friends of mine. I know them all. And, there's an ambulance base right below the hospital. And so they were there like immediately. And they scooped me up on a bad board, and we're running, they're running me into the hospital. And at this point, I'm like a couple 100 yards away from the entrance, and they're dragging me in. And so here I am barking orders the whole time. Like, this is the, this is the dose you need to give me to, sedate and, sedate me and, intubate me. And, it's like they're all this stuff. So I'm telling them what to do on the way in. It's like, I guess that's just the mode I was in. Right. And,
right. Running the show.
Yeah. And I just, we get into the ER, and again, it's family, right? It's friends. We're based out of the hospital. I've been working with these folks for years, and they're faced with, not only me, but with Matt and Patrick, and, resuscitating Patrick, and, just, yeah, like what those folks went through too is just, it was, life altering for a lot of those guys too. And
Right.
Yeah.
Seeing your coworker and your friend and family on there, that's, as a nurse, I sit here and I hear you talk about that, and I don't want to put myself in that position, but subconsciously I do. And I think, wow, I have many, many friends who are flight nurses, and for that to be a reality, just absolutely, it goes right here. So yeah, if your nurse is out there listening, you just kind of think about that, and the care that came in, the fact that I have to say you're telling them what meds to use to intubate you. And you said, once a nurse, always the nurse. And I can't say I wouldn't do any differently. Were you aware at the time, though, how severe your injuries were?
Yeah. Like, I didn't really start to feel anything until, like pain or anything like that, until I kind of got into the trauma bay. And then, then I really started to, that's when I really started, I think at the first point, kind of relax a little bit from the initial event or whatever. And then, and I still remember this day. I don't know why, but I was holding my hands up like this, up in the air, and just seeing my skin just like slough off, and they were trying to find an IV spot on me, cause, I was so burned, so I'm yelling out, grab it, grab it, do whatever, and, but, they finally got a line on me, and I knew I was hurt, and, I didn't know how bad or anything like that. I just knew I was hurt, and I didn't know, what was going to come up. Like, and I just remember looking up at one of the nurses who was a travel nurse at that point. And, so I didn't know him very well, but I just looked up at it and said that, tell Amanda I love her. Cause I, right as they're sedating me, because I didn't know if that was it or, what was coming next. And so And that was the last thing I remember until, 5.5 months later when I finally woke up in the intensive care unit down in Denver. So it was a giant, it's still to this day, it's just a giant black hole. Like
of memory there. Yeah. And Amanda, when did you get the call that this had happened? Where were you and what were your thoughts?
So we had just gotten back from a river trip up in Idaho. And in retrospect, that was an incredible gift. It was one of our best river trips we've ever done. And so I was still off because I believe it was a Thursday, and being on salaried work, I wasn't going back to work till Monday. And I had gone to the gym, gone to the grocery store. I just made myself a sandwich and I was sitting down to eat it. And a really good friend of ours called. And what I didn't know when he was calling me was that he already did know that it was the Flight for Life helicopter, but he had heard it through the county alert system, and he knew that I was alone. So his words to me were, Amanda, there was a helicopter crash in Frisco, but I heard that everybody walked away. And of course the panic set in instantly, but my panic and my brain were fighting each other because it was like, it can't be Dave. There's other helicopters that fly around in this county. There's other medical helicopters that come up to get kids. And I was like, there's utility helicopters, Forest Service helicopters. And so I called Dave's phone and there was no answer, which was not a surprise because he left it in the car or his bag when he was at work. And I called the flight nurse line and again, no answer. So panic was starting to get a little bit higher, but I was sitting down at the computer to look up the central dispatch number because I didn't know that one off the top of my head. A friend of ours who runs the ambulance service at the hospital called, and as soon as I saw his caller ID, I knew. And so I picked up the phone and I said, you tell me now what? And he said, he's alive. It's bad. You need to get to the hospital now. And I couldn't breathe. I felt like somebody had just punched me in the gut. I just completely panicked and I just started crying. And I said, you got to get me to the hospital. I can't drive. And so he arranged to have the ambulance supervisor come to our house, which is about 10 minutes from the hospital. And then I asked him if anybody had called Dave's mom. She's very well known in the county. She used to run the public health department. And he said, no, you're the first phone call. And so I hung up with him, and they had just gotten, she and her husband, Dave, had just gotten back in from a hike where they were out of cell service. And she picked up the phone amazingly. And I said, the helicopter crashed. He's alive. Get to the house now. And so they flew out the door and got to our house, which was about 5 minutes away. And just as they were showing up, the ambulance supervisor was pulling in lights and sirens. And so Marilyn and I jumped in the supervisor vehicle and Dave followed in the car, and we were going to the hospital, driving up the hill it was just packed with cars, and it was a holiday weekend. It was just, the county was just, we blow up from 25,000 residents to like 125, 150,000 people in town. As soon as we pulled up we were going lights and sirens. As soon as we pulled up to the door, I jumped out and I ran into the ER. And I got to Dave, and at that point he was already intubated, and there were a lot of people around the bed, and I just looked up at them and, like Dave, I went into nurse mode. And I just said, what's his core temperature? And I just started rattling through the burn list. And they looked at me and they're like, Amanda, we got this. And so I looked around and I looked at the people at the head of the bed. It turned out it was the anesthesiologist. And I just said, who intubated him? And he said, I did. And I said, what did his airway look like? And, he said it didn't look that bad. And then it was just, looking around at good friends of ours taking care of him. And I just, I was like, oh, he's in the best hands possible right now. Right. So when the helicopter arrived to take Dave, and I was aware that other stuff was going on in the department. I didn't know what was going on with Patrick and Matt. So he ended up getting the helicopter that was able to land at the hospital, because at that time Patrick had already died. So I just remember asking them, he's going to university, right? And they said, yeah, he's going to university, because I wanted to make sure he was going there. I used to work there, actually. So as we're putting him into the helicopter, it was starting to rain and the winds were starting to kick up. And the chief flight nurse is just, Peter, he was just hugging me and hanging on to me. And I'm just like, are we really putting him in another helicopter right now?
Wow.
And he said, it's going to be okay, Amanda. Because I knew if he didn't get in that helicopter, he was going to die right there. Right. He was so critical at that point, and he needed to be at the burn center.
It's Nurses Month, and we're celebrating big at Nurse.org. We're not just doing one giveaway, we're giving away hundreds of prizes all month long. That's right, you can win instantly and enter every single day. We're talking Amazon, Visa, Walmart, Starbucks gift cards, plus shoes, scrubs, and so much more from brands nurses actually love. Don't miss out. Head to nurse.org/win to enter now through May 31st. And make sure you're following at nurse.org on Instagram for even more chances to win all month long.
And, even though I knew everything that I knew when that flight crew showed up, everybody was asking, can Amanda go in the helicopter? And I wanted to, because I honestly thought Dave was dying in that helicopter. And, of course, they were amazing. And I think back to that crew, because when they first walked in, it was not our flight company. And my instant reaction was, where's flights? Because I wanted the people I knew and our friends to be taking care of Dave. And they just looked at me and they're like, Amanda, we're grounded. And so it was a flight company that was on the Front Range. I believe they were in Boulder, and they were the closest one to come in. And we've talked to the crew since this is all settled down. And I just keep thinking, God, what was going through their minds? Showing up, knowing that it's another flight crew, and just how professional they were and how they were the calm in the storm during that situation. I came back into the ER and I just collapsed on the floor. I thought I was going to be sick. They put me on a triage gurney. At that point was when the travel nurse, and remembering right, his name's Ron, and I didn't know him either because he was a travel nurse, came to me and he said, Amanda, you don't know me, but I need to tell you that the last thing Dave said was, tell Amanda I love her. And those words stayed with me. Through some very, very dark times. And so for people who are listening, for him to have the presence of mind to come find me and tell me that in the midst of all the chaos, that was such a gift that, I've never seen him again or been able to thank him for that, but that was huge.
That's so true. Guys out there listening, you know how many times you maybe don't see it, you don't know what's going to happen, and you tell the patient or their family member one thing, and especially for ER trauma, we don't ever know. Very rarely do we see the goodness that happens, if there is goodness on the other side. So those little things that you guys do, just like he said, I have to tell you what he said, he found her. They carry a lifetime, and we don't ever see it, but this could be the story that Amanda's telling right now, how it meant something. Let this sit with you. Let this sit with you the next time that you have that nurse feeling that, hey, I need to say something, or I need to go out of the way, or I need to do something for this family. Because while you might not get it right back, or you may never know what happens, it could last a lifetime with somebody, and it could be life-changing and life-altering. So thank you for mentioning that, Amanda. Thank you for bringing it up for us to humanize as nurses and almost feel a healing, because I can put myself in the situation of where you were. And Ron, that's your name out there, thank you. Thank you. So, wow. So, all right, guys, this is, you and I'm over here tearing up. When I heard the story at the conference, there wasn't, people could barely breathe, and people were crying. I'm over there sobbing, sitting next to a flight nurse too, who happened to be there, and he was upset too. And so this is one of the parts where I remember is you guys get to the big hospital in Denver, and you're on the burn unit, and I think Amanda, I remember you saying you get there, and every second is with how bad his injuries were. is Dave going to survive? Is he going to make it? And it wasn't even like a minute by minute. It was a second by second. And ER, trauma, ICU nurses, anybody in critical care, we know how that is. It is literally, you are holding your breath second by second because the injuries are so severe, and you're stuck in your nursing mode. But Amanda, you're not only in nursing mode, you're in, this is the love of my life mode. Tell us how that got. Once you get here, walk us through what happened when you got to Denver.
Well, in the drive down, Dave's stepdad, Dave, drove us down, myself and Marilyn. And it's interesting because your memory plays tricks on you. And there's things that I remember very clearly from that drive down, and things that, like, I don't remember calling my sister. She tells me about the conversation that we had, but, because it was about an hour and a half to get down to the hospital. And, what I remember very clearly was the flight nurse calling me, and how calm he was, and just so reassuring. And the first thing he said to me when I picked up the phone was, he's okay. We got him through the ER, and he's up in the, I think, they said, we got him to the ER, and they're working on him right now. And he told me what he knew. So that was huge to do that. And once we got to the hospital, he was already in the burn unit at that point. And the charge nurse met me at the door, very compassionately, approaching me and just saying, Amanda, he's in the room. We're working on him. And we don't let family members back into it. They call it the tub room. Mm-hmm. And I was crying, and I just looked at him. I said, I know. I said, but I'm a nurse, and I used to work here, and I've already been with him, and I can handle it. And I need to be with him if he's going to die. And he didn't even say one more word. And he just took me back into the room. Mm-hmm. And from that moment on, being able to be not just Dave's wife and, all of that, was just being able to be part of the care team. That set the stage for everything that followed. But for that night, for everybody to have me in there, and for me to be next to Dave, was invaluable. And I don't know how uncomfortable it was for people, but they didn't care. Everybody was just doing what they could to save Dave. And I do remember it was shift change as we were working on him. He was back in the tub room for 4 hours. And one of the techs, just super amazing, just latched onto me, and he was explaining everything. And he was showing me the different burned areas of Dave's skin and why they were determining what degrees of burn. So I was getting both the compassion from them, but I was also getting they were talking to me as a critical care nurse. And I appreciated both. And I remember that one of the nurses was leaving. I didn't know who she was, and she had tears just streaming down her face. And I'm sure she thought that she wasn't ever going to see Dave again. And I don't remember if she hugged me or not, but she just looked at me, and that's all she needed to do. Like, I could see her compassion, and I could feel it. And the burn surgeon, I just remember asking him, can you talk to our family and explain what's going on? And he went into the conference room. I think there was probably a couple hundred people at that point who had gathered. And he just, by the time I got in there, he was already speaking and just telling everybody what was going on, and telling them that he didn't expect Dave to make it through the night, and that if he did, it was going to be an absolute marathon, and that we all just needed to be prepared for that.
So I'm sitting here going through this as a nurse, but also as somebody, my loved one, where I'm in this position. You're surrounded by family. You guys are hoping Dave is going to pull through. You're surrounded by nurses, and you're a nurse as well. But that's probably the worst part, is being a nurse and knowing exactly what you were up against, because we all know what 90% TBSA. And I'm not sure, did you have inhalation burns as well?
So the burn surgeon told me that Dave was one of the worst inhalation injuries he had ever seen. They bronked him pretty quickly after coming in. And when he told me that, it was just even more devastation, because he went into renal failure as soon as he got there. So he was on the continuous renal replacement therapy right off the bat. And then combined with knowing that he had such a severe inhalation injury, And I remember, seeing soot around his mouth when he was first in the ER in Frisco. And so, yes, being a nurse, I knew what we were facing, but it also was helpful to not have to have everything explained to me. So it was a double-edged sword.
Yeah, I can completely sympathize with you on that. So obviously he made it through. He made it through that first night, and you guys wake up, and that first day, second day, third day become harder. But when did you realize, at what point, or if he did you realize he actually might pull through? Or was it just an everyday reoccurrence when you woke up of, we've got to fight another day? I don't know if he's going to survive. Tell us a little bit about that.
It was an everyday, every minute, I don't know if he's going to live battle until he got to the rehab floor, honestly. That was 11 months in. I mean, towards the 10-month mark, we started to see the light, but at the beginning of the 10-month mark, he almost died again. I mean, he got incredibly critically ill in April. The crash happened in July, and he was on death's door again in April of 2016. I just have to say, the next morning, he started developing basically full body compartment syndrome. Mm. And he had one of the most experienced burn nurses taking care of him that morning, Kimberly. And there's so many pieces of this puzzle. Dave calls it the perfect storm of good, that everything had to come together for us to still be here. And Kimberly's just instant pulling the trigger. He's actively dying on us right now. We've got to get him to the OR, and getting that process happening when she did was another factor right there. They had done the escharotomies when they first brought him in, because he didn't have pulses in any of his extremities. At that point, they had to take him to the OR and open up his abdominal compartment and full fasciotomies. And unbelievably or not, in the midst of all of this happening, before he went to the OR, the ophthalmologist came in the room, and she knew enough to do the procedure to release the pressure in his eyes, which, if that wouldn't have occurred, he would be blind today.
Wow.
Absolutely unbelievable.
The perfect storm of good.
Mm-hmm.
The perfect storm of good. Wow, Dave, I have to say that Amanda says that you said it's the perfect storm of good. That really says a lot about who you are, and that probably why you survived. Because we're going to keep going, because I know this story and it just gets so much worse. So when I hear her say the perfect storm of good, I just have to look at you, both of you. And there are just so many things that these nurses, and if you guys will hear them, Dave and Amanda constantly are referencing nurses and the good that the nurses did, and the whole team, doctors. We're not taking away the entire team, the techs, the RT. I mean, I'm sure pharmacists, EVS, this is a team. This is truly healthcare coming together, serving, doing their best for the people that they love. And it's such an encouragement. So I hope everybody, I myself had to take a little breather right there, which is so intense. And I want you guys to remember that, the perfect storm of good as we move through this, because it does get worse. And I want to bring this up because this is one of the most intense parts. And please feel free to fill in anything I missed you. But on month 5, I believe it was on month 5, Dave, you woke up. And what were the first words out of your mouth when you woke up?
After all this, right? I said earlier, like, this is a black hole for me. And it really was. Like, I just remember that day, it was like, and I describe it as like a camera shutter, if you think about it. It was just like, went from like one side to the other. It was just like light to black, or black to light. And it's like, all of a sudden I was awake. And, I kind of had an idea of what had happened, but I didn't know my surroundings or passage of time or anything like that. And so, I didn't know if this is a matter of days, months, or years. But all I knew was that I couldn't move any of my limbs. I couldn't talk. All I could do was mouth words. And I was terrified, like being on the other side, right? Like seeing, what the human body can withstand and go through and how long we can keep people going. Like it's truly, amazing what, the body can withstand. And so it was my nightmare, like that I was like in some persistent vegetative state for years and years. And I was just tucked away in some corner bed for, 100% dependent on care. And I was just terrified, but that's not how I wanted to be or how I wanted to live. And after all this, and, again, I had no passage of, knowledge or passage of time, but, just to fill in here a little bit was, for the past 5.5 months, Amanda was left to pick up the pieces of our lives. Life doesn't stop for this. And, I'm terrible with finances. I'm terrible with books and all that kind of stuff. And, like Amanda enlisted an FBI friend of ours to try to break into my Yahoo account, to take care of stuff, like the check on my, delinquent payments, whatever it is, and that's important to remember, like, especially if we're talking to the healthcare team here, is that, life doesn't stop. And, a lot of the focus is on the patient, naturally, but like, the family's left holding the pieces here, and everything that is left behind, the bills, we didn't have children, but, like there's that whole side of it too. But, so that, you're really taking care of more than the patient. You're taking care of the family members just as much, because, their stress level is dramatically more, trying to figure everything out here. And especially, maybe more so for folks who aren't medically trained or whatever. Like, this is a whole new language for them. It's a whole new situation for them. Everything's foreign. So like trying to just keep that in mind is that you're taking care of a lot more than just the patient at a lot of times. And that's truly just goes along with the job, I guess. But so here I am after all that. She's making life and death decisions for me for months and months on end. And the first thing I tell her when I woke up is that I want to die. And just mouthing words, and which was how I felt at the time. And it was just because I didn't want to be in that situation. But I had no, how unfair this is to Amanda, who's been by my side every day, making these decisions without the knowledge, without knowing my exact knowledge of what I want to go through. And that's the first thing I tell her. And, I'm still confused, obviously a little bit, but, had I known, and Amanda can, I'll let Amanda fill in the rest here, because there's my version of what happened in the hospital, and then there's the real version of what happened in the hospital. So Amanda can fill in what happened just before I went.
Yeah. So how we got to that point was that Dave ended up having uncontrolled bleeding in his chest. And at that point in time, he was on the continuous dialysis. He had pneumonia in both lungs. He was on really high vent settings just to deal with that. He was in septic shock. He was literally in septic shock for 10 months. And I know sometimes people with medical backgrounds look at me like I'm not being truthful when I say that, because how's that possible? But he was on vasopressin for the constant entirety of that time. And then we would add in Levofed, and at times we had to do epinephrine. When the septic shock, it would go in peaks and valleys and waves. And that was one of the other things too, with being part of his care team, that the team actually welcomed me in to take on that role. And I was kind of the canary in the mine, because when the septic waves would hit, I could see it happening with his mental status prior to it showing up on the blood pressure and the temperature and all of the other stuff. So we could get a jump start on throwing the antibiotics at him. And so going into that situation, the team had discussed for days what they were going to do about the uncontrolled bleeding in his chest. And they finally made a determination that they were going to do a thoracentesis to relieve the bleeding. And they did that. And then the several hours following that, it just spiraled into massive decompensation, where Dave was just hemorrhaging in his chest. And so it was the middle of the night, and the CT surgeon burst into the room and, was just like, gotta emergently take you to surgery. And I'm like, what do you mean we have to emergently take him to surgery? And at that point, they were starting the massive resuscitation protocol. And so the CT surgeon was taking over, and they started explaining the procedure to me. And I said, whoa, stop. You can't do that. You can't extubate him or take his trach out, because a few days ago, we had to emergently bronch him at the bedside. We lost his airway. He had a distal occlusion, and he just looks at me and he's like, okay, well, then we're not going to take the trach out, and we're going to change our procedure. And I tell people that story because it's just an example of, no matter how good the care is, how things can happen. And, you don't expect that CT surgeon in an emergent situation coming in to do an emergent thoracotomy to sit down and read the chart for the last few months and weeks and even know what they're looking for to find that. So, that was just another example of the perfect storm of good. But so when they opened Dave up, it was a total of 5 liters of clotted blood and active blood that they pulled out of his chest. 'Cause they had put a chest tube in prior to taking him to the OR, and then he came out with 2 chest tubes. They weren't able to close his chest because of the burn scarring. So he's laying there with an open chest, in septic shock, double pneumonia, post-open thoracotomy. I mean, for all of us, like, the statistics for a healthy person coming in for a car crash and getting an open thoracotomy are not in your favor. And so when you just wrap your head around what exactly was going on in that situation, how crazy that is. And I remember talking to the CT surgeon, and I asked him, did you find the source of the bleeding? And they didn't. They did mention that there was a section of the lung that was very damaged. And so I think what happened was he had a tamponade on a damaged piece of lung tissue. And then once they pulled the blood out, it created a cavity where it just became a massive, flush of bleeding. But so it took 3 days before they were able to take him back in and close him back up. And they still couldn't close him all the way. So then and during those 3 days, it was just constant at the vent, trying to adjust the settings, trying to do anything we could. We didn't know if his brain had taken a hit. We were running ABGs the whole time during the massive resuscitation, and he developed superior vena cava syndrome. I mean, his head was like twice its normal size, completely purple. It was the same nurse that was with me in the tub room, was with us in the tub room that first night, that left crying. One of my favorite nurses, Jill. And that's not to disparage anybody else that I'm not mentioning your name. There were a lot of incredible nurses, but she and I just looked at each other and we were just like, he's got to go to the OR now. He's got to go now. He's got to go now. And we knew, like, when the anesthesia team came in to take him down to the OR, I thought the anesthesiologist was going to pass out. He went ghost white looking at Dave. God. Everybody knew he was 1 foot in the grave at that point. And it was it was a judgment call doing the massive resuscitation. When do you take him back? When do we have coagulation stable enough to open him up? But so even though we were seeing the ABGs, we didn't think he had taken a hypoxic hit. We had to start peeling away the medications because we couldn't take him to the MRI. He was too critical. Eventually, from peeling away the medications, as Dave explained, it was an instantaneous wake up, like the camera shutter. I was at the bedside when it happened, and I knew instantly when it happened because he looked straight at me, which he hadn't done for 5.5 months. And he started mouthing, "I want to die." And I, of course, fell apart, grabbed the nurse and said, "I think this is what he's saying. Can you confirm it?" And she did. And so we had a big meeting with family and all the medical crew, and we just all determined that this was a shock to Dave, and we were going to just see how things went over the next day or two. And I told everybody, I said, if these are Dave's wishes, I'm going to respect them. And I just was like, that night I cried harder than I've ever cried in my life, I think, despite everything that had happened up to that point. And I just was hoping that it wasn't going to go that direction. So what Dave didn't know is that right before that, he had been sitting on the edge of the bed doing physical therapy. And he was interacting with his environment. He could move all of his extremities, in fact, and he could talk, but we had just taken his passenger valve off. We were doing some maintenance in his trach. And so he wakes up and he can't move. He can't talk, and he's in this horrible state.
Okay. Well, right here, guys, we're going to pause. We're going to take a pause. And there is a part 2 of this because I do know the whole story. And I want you guys to come back. I want you to take this and process it because it you think it can't get worse, but he goes through so much more. And so does Amanda. But the perfect storm of good ends up with a lot of good things and a lot of rallying for safer standards came out of it. A lot of encouragement is going to come from this story. So I really want you guys, we're going to, in this episode here, there's going to be a part 2. So come back and join us there. And until next time, stay safe, nurses.
Thanks for joining Nurse Converse, brought to you by Nurse.org. Help us grow by leaving a 5-star rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. Nurse.org supports nurses with career and education tips, life advice, and breaking news. Thank you for all you do and for being you.